Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's seminar on how technology is being deployed in schools to support inclusion. I'm Natalie Pereira, the Chief Executive of the Education Policy Institute, and we are hosting today's webinar with the very kind support from our colleagues at Capita. And in a moment, we'll hear from Caitlin Bell, who's Head of Marketing Development at Capita. We've got a great hour and a half lined up for you today, including an expert panel to talk in detail about their experiences and their direction of travel in using technology to support inclusion. So after we hear from the panel, there'll be an opportunity for you to fire off questions to them. And you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you've got any questions in the meantime to do with tech or anything else, then do also feel free to use either the chat or Q&A function. So, as I said, we'll hear from Caitlin in a moment. We will also receive a presentation on EPI's own research on SEND, inclusion and benchmarking from Jo Hutchinson, who's our Director for SEND and Additional Needs. But before all of that, just a bit of kind of context setting. So we're at quite a pivotal moment in terms of both the direction of policy for SEND and inclusion, and we're expecting a Department for Education white paper later in the autumn. That will set out the planned reforms that they have for SEND and for inclusion more widely, we think, and there'll be a consultation that follows. So a real moment to think about what we want the system to deliver. Alongside that, we've got the disruptor of emerging technology and AI, and an opportunity to think not only about how the education system can make the most of those technology disruptors, but also think about specifically how they can be used to support children with additional needs. And that's really at the heart of what we want to discuss today, and what we want to hear from our lineup of experts this morning, and also from you in the audience. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the morning. Please feel free to interact with questions, and we'll come on to them as soon as we can. But before I introduce Jo and our expert panel, I'm going to hand over to Caitlin Bell, Head of Market Development at Capita. And a warm welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here with EPI today, who, as Natalie's mentioned, have produced the Effective Schools Group Tool, which has integral insights on inclusion. And Jo will talk through that very shortly. But it's really also great to be joined by such esteemed colleagues from across the sector to explore how we can leverage technology and data to build a more inclusive education system. As Natalie's mentioned, we know the challenges are significant. The attainment gap between pupils with special educational needs and their peers remains way too wide, and identification and support can also vary dramatically depending on where a child lives. But we also know that technology, when it's used well, can be a powerful tool to close those gaps, not just in terms of educational outcomes, but also in terms of opportunities for children. Across the UK, there are many, many amazing examples of innovation and impact, and I think Michelle and Yola will talk through some of those that they're seeing within their trust. But Capita works in Northern Ireland with the Education Authority, and there we're seeing some really, truly inspiring practice surface from schools using immersive technology such as VR headsets and sensory environments to support emotional regulation and attention spans of pupils with complex needs, and also in mainstream classrooms where built-in accessibility features are enabling pupils to participate more fully in learning, and that's all pupils. So that's fantastic. And for the 10th year this summer, Capita and the Education Authority ran the ICT Excellence Awards for Northern Irish schools. These awards have helped shine a light on what's possible when schools are supported to embed inclusive technology into everyday teaching, and they're backed by statistics showing an increase in learning outcomes. It's really quite amazing, some of the case studies that are coming out of there. And I really believe that the more we collectively share examples of such great practice such as this, the more each child will benefit from the power of technology. However, I must say, of course, technology on its own isn't the answer. It needs to be paired with training, confidence building for those that are using it, and also a shared collaboration inclusion culture of shared collaboration inclusion, um, and a place, a safe space, I guess, for people to come and share knowledge and to test ideas out, and not to feel like their ideas aren't worth sharing and talking through. I know it sounds really obvious to say that, but it's sometimes often a lack of awareness of the technology available, or also a proper program of training that leads to the intended purpose of that tool not being properly delivered, and therefore the technology being sat there and being redundant. So it's really key that we get that kind of foster that collaboration and safe space. So that's why today this conversation is so important, because it's not about what's out there and what's available, but it's about how we use it and how we share what works and what doesn't work. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from my other colleagues on the panel today, and exploring more thoroughly how we can harness technology and data to create a system that works for every learner. So with that in mind, I'll hand over to Jo to talk through the effective group tools.
Hi, good morning, everyone. You should be able to see my slides now appearing on the screen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the context in slightly more depth than Natalie gave us in her opening comments, give you a handful of findings from our research, including the effective school groups tool, and then finally some thoughts on areas where technology and data use might be able to help us make progress in improving inclusion in schools. So next slide, please. So to start off with just a little bit more depth on our current context for school inclusion at the moment. All of you will be aware we are still experiencing the legacy of austerity and less availability of public services for children that sit around the school, and also worsened levels of child poverty. We've got ongoing challenges in teacher recruitment and retention in schools. Schools are also experiencing the long shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, it's a time when the number of children identified as having SEND is rising rapidly. That's particularly the case for children with autistic spectrum disorder, social, emotional, and mental health needs, and speech, language, and communication needs. And we're also seeing worsening mental health among children and young people. That is visible in the NHS surveys that tell us what proportion of children have probable mental health disorders. And also, we're seeing some challenges around school belonging that are visible in survey sources such as the Manchester Be Well surveys. So overall, it's a picture of heightened additional needs, some hollowed out public services, and of course, you'll all be aware we're in a very tight fiscal context, which makes addressing these challenges more complex. Next slide, please. So what do we know about inclusion and what's happening with inclusion at the moment? So as you'll be aware, EPI and Capita developed the Effective School Groups tool, which allows school groups to examine their context and performance across an array of different domains, everything from the school's funding position to workforce position, what kind of pupil intakes it has, and in its admissions, and what are the outcomes for pupils like across a number of dimensions, including attainment, attendance, and exclusions. So it's a sort of multi-domain tool that enables schools to consider across the piece, how are they comparing with the whole distribution of school groups out there. And the finding that we've drawn from that at a high level, I think that's most relevant to inclusion, that I want to draw out for you this morning, is that it appears that there are some trade-offs between different kinds of inclusion that we've seen within the results from the tool. So, for example, when comparing the average outcomes across school groups that are multi-academy trusts versus school groups that are local authority schools, and also schools that are not part of a group, they're in a single academy trust. What we found is that, for example, on average in multi-academy trusts, those schools tend to have higher proportions of children who are disadvantaged and have low prior attainment, but they also achieve good attainment for those disadvantaged groups as in their outcomes. However, this is balanced against having less favourable outcomes than the local authority school groups and other schools in terms of pupils' attendance, how many suspensions and exclusions they're experiencing, and unexplained exits from school. So it appears that, across the different ways of thinking about inclusion, sometimes these things have trade-offs, and it's a complex business to achieve the best outcomes across the board. So looking at some national headline indicators to help us understand the inclusion context, we're also seeing some widening disadvantage gaps at all ages. That's a trend that goes back to the sort of late 2010s, so it predates the pandemic. But since the pandemic, we have also seen a big decline in school attendance that you'll all be aware of. We've also seen longer term rises in grey exclusions in terms of the number of unexplained exits that are occurring from schools, and also larger numbers of children leaving the school system to go into elective home education. We've also seen some concerning patterns around school enjoyment and belonging, particularly at the transition from primary to secondary school. We can see that through BWell's survey results. And finally, just looking beyond the school system, we are also seeing rising numbers of young people who are not in education, employment and training, and also increasing numbers of young people who are now part of the disabled benefits caseload. So there are some concerning indicators there that are telling us that the inclusion challenges are increasing currently. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to mention a few findings from EPI's research into the identification of special educational needs and disabilities. And the overall picture from that is really one of inconsistent recognition of needs between different schools, between schools and other agencies, and also between different groups of pupils within schools. So the top finding from that research was really that the school attended by the pupil, particularly in primary school, was the most important factor in predicting which children are identified as having SEND and which children are not identified as having SEND. And that is after adjusting and controlling for a whole rich array of information about those children. So we also found some inconsistent recognition of children who are under the care of CAMS within the SEND system. So certain kinds of disorder within CAMS had a high likelihood of those children being recognised as having SEND in the SEND system, particularly the neurodivergent conditions like autistic spectrum disorder and ADHD. However, those young people who had emotional disorders, so depression, anxiety, those sorts of disorders, were relatively unlikely to have their needs recognised within the SEND system. We also found that identification of SEND was either delayed or permanently less likely for some vulnerable groups where it really, is fairly obvious that they would be at high risk of having special educational needs and disabilities. So children in the social care system, those with low attendance at school, children who are receiving suspensions already during Key Stage 2, children who have a high level of school mobility, moving repeatedly from school to school, and those who are facing language barriers and speak English as an additional language. And we also found some more arbitrary differences. Groups that were underrepresented among the children who were identified as having SEND included the most disadvantaged children within local areas that have a high level of SEND need overall. Girls, Asian pupils, and autumn-born pupils. So there's a certain amount of kind of arbitrary difference that is happening within the system also. And just this doesn't come from our research, but is part of the context for it. It's worth noting that the universal 2-year-old health visitor checks really are no longer reaching all children. There's at least a quarter of children they're not reaching currently. So it shouldn't surprise us when we find that children joining reception, there are larger numbers of children who have needs that have not been picked up at an earlier point when they might have been. Next slide, please. So here just a few points around some wider groups alongside the SEND group and including the SEND group that indicate also that we have some incoherent policy responses to different groups based on the level of need that they display in terms of their outcomes in GCSEs, for example. So there are groups with less support in the system than children who have education, health and care plans, but who have actually quite comparable GCSE outcomes to those children. And the two groups that we've come across that fit that pattern are children who have been on the SEND register for 6 or more years, but never had any HCP. So they're a SEND support level of SEND. And also children who are late arriving within the English state school system, so arriving in particularly in years 10 and 11 and speak English as an additional language. They also have comparably low outcomes, but much less of a coordinated policy response to their needs. And we're also seeing some groups where the school funding system has some anomalies within it. So, for example, children with child protection plans have worse GCSE outcomes than those children who are in the wider pupil premium group, particularly those who are eligible because of having EVER6 FSM status. So they have worse outcomes, but they don't have a pupil premium for those children with child protection plans. And we're also seeing ongoing gaps in policy for some groups with very low GCSE outcomes. So particularly refugee and asylum seeking children, other than those who are unaccompanied and in the care of the local authority, there's very little coordinated response for their needs in education. Gypsy Roma traveller children and Black Caribbean children, those are groups where we, looking back longer term to pre-2010, had a lot of active policy, but that has no longer been the case in recent years. and those groups continue to have well below average attainment. And finally, we also have some groups of pupils with needs that are actually too severe for them to be educated in mainstream school all the way up to age 16. So those who we're finding now in alternative provision. But there's no policy for post-16 support for those children. Unless they have an EHCP, they fall into the gaps when they move to further education. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide I'm going to talk through, which is where I'm just going to reflect a little bit on where there might be opportunities to intervene earlier and in smarter ways, where technology and data may help us to do that. So just echoing what Caitlin said earlier, training is really, really critical. And in particular, we see a gap in training in child development for school staff. Which could help them to underpin the assessment of special educational needs and disabilities, which we've seen as a bit of a problem in terms of its consistency from our research findings. We also think that communities of practice and expertise around specific types of needs can be important, because it will never be possible to train all teachers to know everything about every kind of special educational need and disability. Therefore, having communities that they can engage with for support and information when they come across children with rarer kinds of needs could be an important way of supporting them. We think that also another thing that's important is the availability and co-location of specialist professionals, thinking particularly of professionals such as education psychologists and also speech language therapists and various other kinds of specialist support professionals. We also think there may be some scope for proactive screening of some of those high-risk groups we saw there, where there was delayed and lower than expected levels of identification of SEND needs, even though the groups are inherently at high risk of having special needs. Also, just currently in Parliament, the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill contains provisions for single unique identifiers for children across all public services. And so just thinking about how we might, should that make it through Parliament, how we might maximise and make the most of those single unique identifiers to link data across services and connect professionals across different agencies. Can also see a lot of opportunity for assistive technologies, as Caitlin was touching on, broader forms of assessment also, which I think we're going to hear a little bit more about from our panel, and adaptive curricula that better meet the needs of children with more severe additional needs. And also there's a potential role for gathering and analysing pupil voice and really understanding that belonging and well-being side of the inclusion puzzle. So I'm going to stop there. I hope that I've given you some ideas and thoughts, some of which might be useful in formulating your own comments and questions and responses. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that, Jo. And I popped a link into the chat that I hope you can all see, that links to the live version of our online benchmarking tool. And once again, massive thank you to our colleagues at Capita for supporting that work too. And I think it's worth noting a couple of things. That this tool has intentionally provided a blueprint for the Department for Education in thinking about how they can improve the transparency and data sharing amongst amongst the sector more widely. And you will have seen yesterday there was a suite of announcements on accountability, which included a commitment by the DfE to introduce a new school benchmarking tool. And I hope that they draw lots of useful lessons from the work we've done. We will continue to work on our benchmarking tool because we don't know how long it will take for the DfE to get their one up and running. We don't know whether it will be as extensive as our one currently is, or even as we're planning for it to be once we expand and update it in the coming months. And also, the DfE described their tool as something which users will need to log into, whereas ours is open access. So we're definitely keeping our tool going for the time being, but it's really good that it's been able to influence DfE direction of travel so far. If you have any feedback on the tool, once you've had a chance to look at it and play around with it a bit, please do get in touch and let us know. So thank you again to Jo for an excellent presentation. Jo isn't technically on our panel, but if you have any questions for her, do feel free to fire those into the Q&A too. Without further ado, we do have one question, sorry, on Send. I'm not going to answer that directly now or take it to a panelist because I'm not clear when you talk about whether the voice of the parent is considered at all. Could you say a bit more about through what lens? Do you mean in our benchmarking tool, or do you mean in a different policy making function? So if you can clarify that, then I'm sure that one of us will be able to come back to you. So let's move on now to our panel. We will hear from Peter Swallow, who is the MP for Bracknell and a former lecturer and teacher. He was elected to Parliament in July 2024, so comes into Parliament with lots of experience of the sector. We'll then hear from Katie Ghost, who is CEO of Kids, which is a national charity supporting disadvantaged children, young people and their families. And then finally, we'll have a kind of joint effort from Rochelle Richmond, who's Education Director at the Bourne Education Trust, and her colleague Yola Wilkins, who's Business Director at the Trust. So we've got a vast range of experience and expertise. They will also be joined on the panel by Caitlin, who'll be able to take questions again. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Peter for some opening remarks, and a warm welcome to you, Peter.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here today and thinking about everything education is my happy place as a former teacher and lecturer and now chair of the all-party parliamentary group on schools learning and assessment. I think that we often think about the march of technology, the growth of AI, as very zero sum. Either it's going to destroy everything and lead to the apocalypse, or it's going to be the great panacea that fixes society's ills everywhere it finds them. And obviously the reality is that neither of those things are going to be true, and that there will be positives and negatives, as there have always been with new technologies and new challenges facing society. But I think that there are really exciting opportunities to be seized with these new technologies, and I think particularly for students who have often most struggled to access education. I think about the way in which students who are not able to attend school in my local authority, Bracknell Forest, have been able to get an education because my local authority has invested in robots that allow students to attend class remotely, learning some of the lessons from the pandemic as they do so. I think there are huge opportunities for technology to reinforce all of the important pedagogical tools that teachers already know are really helpful for children with additional needs, but also helpful for learning more broadly, whether that's gamification, scaffolding, dual coding, all much easier when using technology. And they can help with teacher workload as well, which will just free up teachers to be able to support more in the classroom. Of course, it's important to say that none of that is a given, and the way that it's employed and the way that teachers are supported to use new technologies has to be really carefully thought through. And finally, I think that there are also big questions around exams and around other forms of assessment. We know that there are lots of concerns in the university sector and increasingly in schools as well about the use of technology by students to affect the way that exams and assessments work. I think as well as recognizing the challenges there, we also have to grasp the opportunities to completely rethink the way that we assess young people. And in doing so, we absolutely have to place inclusion at the heart of that. It frankly isn't good enough to pretend that AI, for example, is not going to be something that young people have to be empowered to use, not told not to use, because it's here to stay. So it's about thinking about how we can support young people to effectively use it, and recognizing that for lots of young people, that is going to be a real leveler, whilst also recognizing that for others, there will be real barriers to grappling with that. So as a backbench Labour MP, I'm looking really closely at what's going to come out of the curriculum and assessment review, and absolutely seeing how assessment is rethought and reimagined in a world where we simultaneously must focus more on inclusion and put it at the heart of everything we do, and come to terms with the changing nature of technology in the classroom and in working life and in life as a broad whole.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. And lots of themes there around safety in particular, and the role of the forthcoming curriculum and assessment review, which so we might come back to. But we'll move on now to hear some opening remarks from Katie, and a warm welcome to you, Katie.
Fantastic. And Peter, it's great to follow on from you. And I love you for this sort of can-do approach, but also the nuance and the balance that was in your remarks. So KIDS provides disabled children, young people and their families with life-changing and creative support. And we reach 22,000 children and young people each year, as well as parents, carers, siblings and professionals across education, health and social care. And we also empower disabled children and young people to amplify their voices and champion their rights. And one particular passion of mine is digital inclusion. And in 2020, I co-founded with Sense, the Digital Services Consortium, which brings together 12 disabled children's charities. We're now jointly delivering a digital inclusion programme where we're going to be providing 20,000 disabled or seriously ill children and young people with devices, with the training, the skills, the confidence, and then the ability to use a virtual service provided by one of our charities, and then to give honest feedback about that virtual experience. So I think it's that trialing and learning and adapting as we go that's so important. Tech in schools is crucial, and how it links with tech at home and in the local community. And we know this because we provide community services like activity breaks, after school clubs. And if we're supporting young people with skills and confidence technology, that's going to translate to the school environment as well. So I just want to open by briefly talking about the need to transform the everyday experience of students and schools through the positive use of technology. You know, we know that iPads, tablets, Chromebooks already in classrooms are powerful inclusion tools if staff are trained, to your point, Caitlin, to use the accessibility features, the voice to text, the voice activation, the timers, the screen readers. But this isn't yet the new normal, is it? Interactive whiteboards where each student's using a tablet to contribute to the work on the main board, which I think is probably still more common in special schools. And then using AI to support students to structure questions, to adapt to the diversity of communication needs, including students who are not verbal. Young people's ideas bring to life what their everyday expectations are. So young people say to us, you know, how about a teacher having a tablet which tells them the SEND students they've got coming up in class next with a mini brief about what their needs are, interactive maps in schools that help find where you go using your mobile, the digital EHCP that can be updated, reviewed, shared more easily. Another basic example we heard of recently, a young person who has a person to push them around for the school day when what they need is £4,000 to have an adapted chair so they self-propel themselves. That is independence and that is inclusion. It sounds very basic, but we're not there yet. And again, I think to your point, Caitlin, tech and innovation needs a supportive culture. So in the last fortnight, we heard about somebody who refused to use a pen reader due to the stigma of being different, which I thought was such a powerful cultural example of how we've got to have the whole package, haven't we? Not just the tech. Or the example of the eye gaze technology that didn't have the appropriate symbols for a student to take GCSE maths. Whilst that was an issue with the tech first and foremost, the school wasn't thinking ahead and being aspirational enough. And once the tech was upgraded, the student passed the exam. There are really positive examples. Peter, you mentioned the robots in your area, and I know in other places like Wakefield, we've got that as well. The thing I want to end with, I suppose, is it's that technology with purpose, isn't it? We know so many students we send are not in school. The robots there are helping to make that connection and keep the pathways there. But I know that people who've developed those have had to combat the assumptions that there might be a security or data breach or something. So again, we've got to think about the cultural and the positive can-do attitude. So my message is really, let's grasp the everyday and make available the basics. We've got to make some of this stuff the new normal, and we've got to accelerate new tech and AI opportunities with young people with SEND in the driving seat. And Annette, to your point, this has got to be done with parents and carers who are enormously expert and are often trialing this stuff. And that's really at the heart of the Digital Services Consortium. We're taking a whole family approach because we use tech as part of a household, and then we're using tech in schools as well. So it's a great conversation to be part of, and very much looking forward to the discussion as well.
Lovely. Thank you. It's always so interesting to hear from you, Katie, and all the innovative things that you're working on. Right. Finally, before we move on to the Q&A, we'll hear from... Could you... Oh, I hope that's okay now. I'd like to introduce Rochelle Richmond and Yola Wilkins, who join us from the Bourne Education Trust, and a very warm welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. We started our AI journey across all of our schools about 2 years ago. And when we started that journey, we also had a focus on adaptive teaching as well, mainly within our primaries. And it's part of our digital strategy, which is led by our digital lead. And we believe from the start, we've been very clear that AI is a tool, and that where it's effectively used, that's only possible if everything that we do is underpinned by sound teaching principles. And what we really wanted to do was to enhance the expertise that we had within our schools, not to replace them. In terms of the implementation of the strategy, it started with our digital lead sharing information with our head teachers, and then that moved on to training. I know Caitlin was saying how important it is to have all the training when we have AI, when we introduce AI, so that started. So all of our school staff were trained, and our Senkos were also invited to attend a hackathon where they had more opportunities to explore the use of large language models, especially for pupils with SEND, and in particular with a focus on adaptive teaching. Moving forward, the impact that we've seen is that over the last 2 years, we've had an improvement in our outcomes for our pupils with SEND when we compare them to their peers nationally. And that's with the GLD in early years, phonics screening in year 1, and then also with the Key Stage 2 outcomes as well. We know that AI is one of the contributing factors, and that there will be many contributing factors, but we believe that it is one of the key contributing factors because of the way in which it's enabled our teachers to adapt teaching at a deeper level and move beyond just differentiating for our pupils with SEND. In terms of next steps, I'm going to hand over to Yola at the moment. He's going to speak to you a bit more about those, but we want to build on what the successes that we've seen with AI. We've also got, before I hand over, another project which we started in the summer. We believe that we really need to free up our SENCOs more so that they can work more efficiently. And one thing that we are looking at is automating our SEND paperwork. And we believe that if we can do that, our SENCOs can spend more time in classrooms supporting teaching staff and also pupils. And then finally, we also have a body of work on data where we're looking at tracking across our whole trust using our MIS system, tracking progress against EHCP targets, so we can actually identify areas for development and areas of strength in those 4 key areas of SEND need. And I'm going to thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Yola. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Rochelle. So I'm just going to pick up on the next steps that Rochelle's just referred to for our schools. So I think from what we've already heard this morning, it's increasingly clear that there's a significant shift that we're living through in relation to education and technology broadly, and artificial intelligence is developing at rapid speed. And while all of that's really exciting, it also brings for our schools lots of questions and concerns and challenges. And so we wanted to talk about how we're sort of trying to support our schools in managing that. So Born Education Trust is one of the co-founders of a charitable cross-sector initiative called AI in Education, which we co-founded with Epsom College a couple of years ago. And AI in Education brings together a range of expertise from both the state and independent sectors, from researchers, from practitioners, industry specialists, and from student voice as well. And all of this has sort of led us to a place where AI in Education has been able to develop a framework, a certification framework called AI Ed Certified, which is designed to help schools as they sort of navigate ethical and effective AI adoption. So all of our schools are currently working through that framework and using the structure available to them and the comprehensive guidance materials that come as part of that service so that they embed that practice and become more confident in using AI. So the slide's just showing you the 3 certification levels, because essentially the framework works as a phased roadmap to sort of take schools on the journey to confidence. So Explorer level is for schools that are beginning their journey. Practitioner is for schools that are embedding AI and enhancing learning and operations through AI. And Innovator is for schools who are really leading the way and sort of contributing to sector knowledge. So we know that there are lots and lots of tools that are available to support with SEND and inclusion. And we want to make sure that our staff are confident that they're choosing the tools that are going to work most effectively, ethically, safely, and be guided through that process, as well as have opportunity for support from the framework team and from the online community that's been established as part of that. So I've just put the AI in Education web link at the bottom for anybody who's interested in more detail. But we believe it's the way that will enable our schools to be much more strategic and to think in the longer term about how they can embed AI in an ethical and inclusive way. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rochelle and Yola. I'm going to invite everyone now to submit your questions to the Q&A function. So lots covered there on how technology and AI is being used. Also lots of opportunities and risks and areas for caution flagged as well. There's been some discussion in the chat about the importance of making making sure that both the school infrastructure and the home environment can enable equity of access to technology, not just the provision of devices itself. And I think that's an important point that nobody would disagree with. There's one other question directed to Rochelle, which is, what MIS system do you use to track SEND?
We use Arbor, and our MIS manager has just put together an assessment measure that's going to allow us to track the progress against EHCP targets. We're going to be starting that with 2 of our specialist schools, and then we're going to roll it out to our mainstreams who have got pupils with EHCPs.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. Please do keep your questions coming. In the meantime, I would like to ask panelists their view. We've touched on the point about, well, the need to accelerate progress on this, making sure we're harnessing the best of what technology and AI can offer us, and in supporting vulnerable children in particular. But how do we strike the right balance between accelerating and turbocharging progress, but also ensuring safety for children? And again, particularly for those from disadvantaged backgrounds. I might come to Katie on this first, then Peter, then back to our trust colleagues.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, and back to Annette's point almost about parents and carers, I think with the safety point, one of the obstacles can sometimes be parents feeling very anxious about any young person, and perhaps even more so a young person with learning disabilities or different needs, about the virtual world and being safe online, which is why one of the principles of the programme I mentioned earlier is a whole household as a whole family approach, understanding the dynamics. And we know there are barriers where you might not have the time to be with your young person who needs some support to be online. And this will parallel in the classroom as well, where teachers are under a lot of pressure. So I think it just needs some careful thought in terms of how to almost equip a whole school or the whole household in understanding what a safe approach is, and a sort of a balanced approach to risk as well. But I think we can't emphasize enough that whole family or the household approach almost as a sort of an underpinning principle, if you like, when it comes to taking a balanced approach to safety online, and also recognizing, of course, that these are often involve sort of dynamic risk assessments. It's not we talk about online safety, don't we? It's not a static thing. It's something that will keep evolving, and new dangers or challenges might arise.
Great, thank you, Katie. Peter, any reflections from you on the kind of safety versus progress point?
Yeah, just to really emphasize that I think the online safety in particular is an issue that affects all children. I recently met with a fantastic children's mental health organisation in my constituency, and I was just staggered to hear sort of from them the amount of young people that they are meeting who have been severely affected by accessing often quite violent pornography online. And this is, children in primary school sometimes. It is a real risk that young people are facing at the moment. And again, I think it goes back to this point of technology has huge risks that must be mitigated. There is also the opportunity for technology to be part of the solution. So part of the Online Safety Act is compelling social media companies to actually develop algorithms that will help them quickly identify and take down harmful content online. Now, look, there is more we need to do on this, and I certainly think that we cannot see the Online Safety Act as a one and done. It has to be an iterative approach. There are also voices in our politics saying that the Online Safety Act was too far, and I say, and I would just gently say to them that when there are still children who are accessing very harmful content online, and parents frankly do not have the ability to police every second that a young person spends online. I would say it has not gone nearly far enough. But yeah, so I mean, that's a point beyond the SEND system. I think it's a much wider point, but there are real dangers there, and it's something that I know colleagues spend a lot of time thinking about, and we are very alive to the dangers of that at the moment.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. There's also another question to you and to Katie in the chat, asking for a bit more information about how the robots work that you alluded to. And specifically, do they enable pupils to connect to a bricks and mortar school, i.e. physical school, or a virtual school? So I wonder if you might say a bit more about that. It is fascinating.
Yeah, I think they're a bit like Wally. They go into the classroom, and then the kid is virtually in the classroom alongside their peers.
Lovely, thank you. And Katie, very quickly on that robot question, can you say more?
Absolutely, and I'll post a link because this is something that Wakefield Council have been using 27 machines as part of a pilot. So what it is, it's a camera and microphone basically connecting an absent pupil to an actual school so they can speak and see and hear lessons through the device using an app.
Excellent, thank you. I hope that answers your question on the chat. I think that was from Alice. I'm going to come on to Rochelle and Yola now. Back to the question about safety versus progress and the tensions there. And there's also another couple of questions that's come up about the risks of AI, and wondered whether you could say a bit more about what you do to protect children from those risks. And some of the examples given are inappropriate use of chatbots, plagiarism of homework, but also things like hallucination and overdependence. So over to both of you to see if you can shed light on any of that.
Yes. We're going to share the answer. So I think from my perspective, being part of the education team, all of our teams work really closely together on this, and we have very clear policies in place and very clear parameters in which we work. So business, IT, education, safeguarding team all work very closely. And then
sort of in terms of how it operates at a school level, we've set a safe use of AI policy, which sets a really clear ethical framework and some principles within which we expect our schools to be operating. So that talks about things like responsibility, it talks about fairness and equity, privacy being first, human centricity. You know, we talk a lot in across the trust about keeping the human in the loop with everything that we're using, and the policy also will then set some expectations in terms of platforms that we have approved, age appropriate guidance for students, and emerging technologies is another area that we're just updating our approach on at the moment. You know, we've got expectations on our school, and then on the AI and education side, the expertise and the research that's been coming through from those panels is also helping to inform how we're able to support that further and move that forward. And part of the framework focuses on policies and ethics and helps schools to understand, a little bit more about an ethical approach from that perspective too.
Lovely. Thank you to you both. While I have you both here, there's also another question from Pam, and she acknowledges that it's not an easy question to answer, but she's interested in how we support school leaders to ensure AI enhances quality teaching, because there are so many tools evolving so quickly. How can we support you, or how can the system support you as school leaders to make informed decisions?
I think, as I said earlier, everything that we've done has been underpinned by what we know about good teaching. And I think the focus that we had on adaptive teaching really helped steer in terms of teaching and learning that use of some of the AI in the classrooms. And what Caitlin was saying earlier as well about training, so making sure that all of our teachers were trained, our TAs are trained, and making sure that everybody has the information that they require. So I think it was in terms of the approach for leaders, it's been a very measured and considered approach that, as I say, all the teams have worked together. So it's not, it's not the IT team just saying this is what we're going to do. There will be input from everybody. So I think it's really about going back to those sound teaching principles, and that's got to drive everything. Otherwise, it would just become a bolt-on. So it's making sure that we have that. And one thing that our digital lead always says, and has been saying for the last 2 years, is what is the problem that you want to fix, and is this the best tool to do it? And I think that really, really has helped focus us in our classrooms.
Great, thank you. There is a very helpful offer from Caroline at United Learning in the chat. They've undertaken a pilot project on the use of digital tools for children with SEND in the primary phase. And Caroline, if you could send us at EPI a copy of that report, we'd gladly circulate it to attendees as long as we've got all their details. So please keep a lookout for that. And thank you so much for flagging that to us, Caroline. We've got an attendee who has raised her hand. Sue, do you want to ask, Sue Bentham, do you want to ask, I feel a bit like I'm on Eurovision, do you want to ask your question in person? Because if so, we can enable you to do that. Maybe that was an accidental hand. Okay, let us know if you do want to ask a question though, Sue. Right, let's keep going. Really good question here on how we balance the benefits of pupils being able to learn from home versus the cost of them not attending school in person. And Peter, I might come to you first on this. So thinking about the trade-off with building relationships, attending enrichment activities, etc., versus kind of being at home. Just welcome your thoughts on this.
Yeah, look, I mean, I fundamentally think that for the vast majority of children, the best place for them to be is in an inclusive school. And I qualify that with that, an inclusive school, because I recognize that a large part of the challenge we have at the moment with school refusal is because not every school is doing what it needs to in order to support particularly children with SEND. So, it's about how we support children to access education, and ideally access education, in a school that is inclusive and welcoming. And I think technology has a huge part of helping that gap. I think for lots of young people, we talked about those robots earlier, that will be a pathway to spend more of the day physically in the school. There are also fantastic opportunities for children for whom that really isn't possible, to access alternative provision through the use of technology. So actually another great example in my constituency, a alternative provision that's supporting young people to develop qualifications in video games and music. And Katie will know exactly who I'm talking about, because they share the same building with kids in Bracknell. And they are doing a huge amount to use technology to support young people to access education. And again, that is actually physically in person, which is fantastic for those who are able, but there are remote options. So essentially what I'm trying to say is there will be different approaches for every child. And I think what I would say is we have to slightly differentiate what we want the ideal SEND system to look like, which would mean that a lot more young people than are currently able would be in school being supported through technology and other means to spend more of their day in school, with what the reality is now. And the reality is that that is not currently possible for too many children. And we do have to some degree, meet them where they're at. And again, technology has a huge opportunity to help us do that as we reform what we all know is a very broken system.
Thank you, Peter. Katie, I will come to you on that question about the tension between home learning and all of the wider enrichment that a school environment can offer.
Completely agree with everything that Peter has said. This cannot be a trade-off. The way we see it, and Kids provides lots of practical services for young people who aren't in school, who want to be in school, but the school hasn't yet been able to be inclusive and have that in place. So for us, it's technology as part of the pathway back into school. It's an enabler, it's a bridge builder. And also, we need to remember the diversity of the 2 million population of disabled children and young people, children with SEND, very different. You might have a life-limiting condition, you're in hospital a lot, you're not physically able to always to be present in a classroom. The value of technology there, that could be very different from a young person who has emotionally based schooling avoidance and has had some terrible trauma, but again wants to be back in school, but perhaps in a phased way. So how can technology be a bridge for that?
Thank you. And I've completely I've made a big mistake in that. Caitlin, you are also on this panel, and thank you so much. And I'm sorry I haven't brought you in so far. So interested so far in some of the things we've covered around the tension between safety and accelerating progress for vulnerable children in particular. But also kind of anything else where we've talked particularly about the technological disruptor that and opportunities that can be brought to solve some of these solutions. And please forgive me for not bringing you into the panel sooner.
No, that's all right. I think you had the expert speaking there, so no problem at all. I think ultimately, I'll come back to that. It's that need to ensure that we're having that open dialogue, and that's when I talk about we. I talk about everyone on this panel, so everyone from government, policy, charity, educators, everyone in the system, being able to have that open dialogue where we're sharing knowledge and ensuring that we're constantly testing kind of the frameworks out there and kind of learning as we go. Because I think with AI, we all are learning as we go, and so ultimately it's just that constant sharing of knowledge and really just, as I said, that fostering that kind of safe environment where people feel that they can share kind of what's worked and what hasn't. I think, if I may, I might come on to actually some of the questions that have come into the chat around kind of some of the basis of IT infrastructure and actually getting things right at a base level, because I think we touched upon that slightly earlier, but and I think someone's also asked about how the devolved nations are doing that, and we're seeing Northern Ireland take a very different approach. So Northern Ireland, we work very closely with the Education Authority. Basically, we provide a managed service on providing all of their IT infrastructure. So what they've done is essentially invest in a robust infrastructure at a base level. So that's everything from kind of the broadband, the networking, the provision of IT kits, so hardware, software, which all schools across Northern Ireland, so that's about around 1,100, I think, get at a base level. And that can be tailored, and I'm also very conscious that obviously that's not something that we would necessarily be able to replicate UK wide, because it's because of just the size and scale of it. But ultimately, with that, what the children in Northern Ireland get is an equity of digital inclusion. So every child within the sector, so every child within the school system, through from nursery through to secondary, get that base level. But schools can then tailor how they basically how they draw down and the types of technology that they want to use. So I think someone posted in the chat earlier the link to the ICT Excellence Awards that I mentioned in my opening remarks, because there's some really interesting cases there where, because they have that basic level and layer of capability from a kind of that basic IT infrastructure spot, they're able then to then test and develop kind of, I guess, different using different products and services. And I guess the joy of having a managed service is that there's always kind of that ability to raise when there's an issue, get it fixed. Again, at that local level, test what works within that school as well. So looking at kind of different products and services, and looking, I guess, at the wider solution that is required for the schools and the individual schools, as well as at kind of that national level, rather than just each individual school going out and kind of procuring a product here and a product there, and ultimately kind of not being, I guess, not necessarily being sure whether it's going to work or not. I guess being able to have that kind of layer and that ability to share the knowledge between schools and see what works and doesn't, again, comes back to what I've been saying about that sharing knowledge, talking about what's working, talking about what isn't working, and constantly testing kind of as we go. So I think Northern Ireland are doing some quite remarkable things in that space, actually, and testing things like Copilot with teachers, and again, you helping teachers and other members of the education workforce see what tools they've got already available, and not necessarily training them on it, but testing it with them and seeing how they can best use it for the purposes that each individual educator, as well as each individual school, needs it for. So yeah, some really, really interesting things they're doing there.
Thank you, Caitlin. And can you say a bit more about how we can, as a system, ensure that kind of best practice, effective use of effective tools can be cascaded amongst the school system, including early years and colleges, by the way, more effectively and more efficiently? And then there's another question for you about how the Four Nations are responding to tech and AI more generally, which you've covered, but also whether there's anything more that can be done to support safe and effective uptake.
Well, I think at a local level, probably if you think about kind of multi-academy trusts, and my colleagues at Bourne will be able to talk to this more, it's about the leadership teams sharing what's working in their individual schools and what's not. But at a kind of more national level, I guess it's that, I guess exactly what we've done with the group effect. I always get the name wrong, sorry, the schools group effective tool, which obviously DfE are starting to adopt and look at actually. How is this process it's been fantastic in terms of collecting data. How can then DfE at a national level go look at what kind of insights and data they're getting? And so ultimately, I think probably, if I'd be so bold to say, look, that conversation with organisations in the devolved nations that are doing things slightly differently, and at that national kind of level, to say, look, what other ideas could we bring to the table, and what other ideas could we test? So I think at kind of local level, obviously, it's that. I come back to constantly that sharing of knowledge, and not being afraid to reach out to your colleagues in other schools or within business as well, to say, look, what's working, what are we doing, how do we keep this conversation going? And it's through webinars like this, it's through the forums that Michelle, Yola, Katie have all described, and actually, I think the more we can do of this, the better. And then hopefully, then at a national level, we get that kind of attention to say, look, there are ways of doing this differently. Obviously, of course, I'm very aware it always comes down to funding and resource and time. And so you can kind of think big, but it's through small iterative change that we'll see things change, I think.
Thank you, Caitlin. Before I move on, Alison Peacock, who we are very appreciative has joined us on the webinar today, has reminded us that the Chartered College of Teaching and the DfE have established the EdTech Evidence Board to review and advise on effective EdTech and to cascade it. So thank you for reminding us that. And then Caitlin, before I move on, another specific question to you is, what product or AI application has been the biggest game changer for SEND in your view? and why?
I'm not sure I could answer that, if I'm honest, Mark, because obviously I don't see all of the sets of products and services, and there's a lot of really great things out there. The things that I'm hearing have been very, very helpful are those virtual reality sensor headsets, in terms of being able to get people, children, sort of calm and in a space where they're able to, kind of, I guess, access different parts of their brain where they can and then get more learning. But if I think about assistive technology, we Capita provide assistive technology for higher education students through the Disabled Students Allowance. We see a lot there in terms of reading pens being able to support with assessing exams. That's obviously within the higher education sector. So I mean, I wouldn't say the biggest get. I wouldn't know, but I know that there is a whole reef of kind of assistive technology out there, as well as kind of that more I guess immersive ways of learning, that support with individuals being able to access a curriculum into kind of right through the school system and into higher education. So in terms of the biggest get, I don't know if anyone else on the panel will be able to answer that in more detail, but I think there's just a collection that we can draw upon, which it's yeah, just worth exploring and continuing to test. But thank you for the question. I don't know if I passed any of my colleagues on that one.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
It
I might
is
move
a
on
tough
to
one.
Rochelle and Yola. So interested specifically in your view on the tension between kind of where we started this round of questions, the tension between children studying at home or learning from home, but also missing out on all the enrichment that school has to offer. There was also another question in the chat that I thought may be more relevant to both of you, which is how do you ensure that technology is integrated with the curriculum? Because that's an important feature that's been borne out by the evidence. So thoughts on those two questions, please, from both of you.
In terms of the first one, I agree with what Katie and Peter said, and I think Katie mentioned using technology as a bridge builder. I think that's really, really key. We want all of our children in school, and I think that that is where we need to have them. And I think we need to make sure that whatever we're using is encouraging them back into school. So that would be our view in that respect. In terms of the second question about the curriculum and how we make sure can you just repeat the last bit there, Natalie?
Yeah. So
how it's embedded, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to looking at what the problem is that you're trying to fix and making sure that whatever you are doing is underpinned by, as I said, sound teaching principles. And
I think that's part of the reason why we're so keen for the schools to be working through the framework, because actually that will help them to come up with a sensible and sort of purposeful approach, rather than using tech for tech's sake. Certainly from an AI tool perspective, using it really purposefully and where we know it's going to make an impact, rather than get carried away by the latest new thing, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, thank you to both of you. Alison has also flagged another point in our Q&A, which is that hospital education can be very usefully advanced through the use of robots. We have in EPI, we have lots of discussions with the sector, including parents and carers, about SEND and technology. But very rarely do we talk about hospital schools. And I wondered, Katie, is this anything that you'd looked at in your organisation?
But it's something I'd love to take to our consortium, because we're working with Wellchild and in other associations together for Short Lives, and just some of these organisations that have got that real frontline expertise with educationalists as well. So I think that would be a great conversation to have as a follow on.
Yeah, I completely agree. And if any of our participants today know of any good practice that's improving hospital education, either through tech or in other ways, please do get in touch and let us know. I think this is a very kind of under-researched and under-addressed area. I'm going to go to Peter just to check in on whether he knows anything about or has come across any good examples of hospital education. And then I'm going to move us on to the curriculum and assessment review. But please do keep your questions coming in the meantime. So, Peter, over to you.
I always think it's important for politicians to admit when they don't know the answer, and I will be very honest and say I don't know the answer on that one. I could say that it's because I don't have a hospital in my constituency, but the honest answer is I just don't know. So I'm very sorry.
No, completely appreciate that, and very refreshing. So Peter, we started with you raising the opportunity that the curriculum and assessment review brings. What would be your one or two priorities for the final report when it's published? We're hearing imminently.
So I think it's really important that we consider not only how things are assessed sort of now and in the immediate future, but also take a long-term view into what assessment, one, is for, and two, looks like. And I know that there has been a lot of focus on particularly on what it's for and what it looks like for children with special educational needs, and for a separate category of people who are struggling to get the the required grades in GCSE, maths, and English, and therefore find themselves in too many cases locked out of other opportunities going forward. So it's really important that it addresses that, and then of course, there's the question about what the curriculum looks like in all of its breadth. This is my opportunity just to say, I think it is really important. I was a classics teacher. I taught Latin. And I think it is really important that as we look forward into a future of AI, of technology, actually we recognize that many of those human skills that AI is not going to be able to replicate are going to be even more important than they currently are. And for me, that means arts and humanities absolutely have to be there. Every child have the opportunity to study the arts and humanities in a way that is meaningful for them. So an inclusive curriculum as well has to be one that provides opportunities for students to access a wide range of subjects, and that's particularly important, I think, for children with additional needs, who often the answer is to strip away all of the things that really enrich the school day and focus on those core subjects. I'm not saying that maths and English aren't really, really important. They are, absolutely. But I think I hope that one of the findings from this is actually, if a child is really struggling to access education, but arts are the thing that get them through the school day, then let's make sure that they have access to the arts, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Peter. And what I might do is just go down each of the panelists and ask them for their priorities from the curriculum and assessment review too. And that might bring us to the end, but let's wait and see. Rochelle and Yola, over to you. I'm sure you have lots of thoughts on this.
Agree again with everything that Peter said, and I think we would want that question that Peter asked there. What is assessment for, and is it? I think, especially if we're looking at, obviously it's key, but if we're looking at some of those our pupils with SEND, is it actually allowing them then to achieve and to gain, any so for example anything that would help them move on forward. So, and I think if we think of, for example, very practical example in terms of writing at the end of Key Stage 2, we see many pupils with SEND who can, if they've got a computer in front of them, they can type, they can come up with a story or a piece of writing that's really good, but because the way in which we're assessed, handwriting, something might find difficult, they can't actually show what they can do. And then again, around the curriculum, it's making sure that, we are seeing that all of those subjects are presented and that all of our children with special needs can access. So, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you to both of you. We'll go Caitlin and then Katie for priorities from the curriculum and assessment review.
Thank you. So I think I echo obviously everything that everyone said. I completely believe in the arts and the humanities as well, being an ex-drama graduate. So the ability to be able to learn in different ways and socialise and interact with people, I think is so key, and will be even more key kind of as kind of the influx of AI and the ability also in that kind of critical analysis and critical thinking and how we assess for that. I'll be very interested to see how that's reviewed, and also from, I guess, the technology side of actually looking at what, as you mentioned there, Rochelle, looking at how we can use technology to assess. So testing potentially digital assessments, again, looking at learning platforms, if we can consider obviously different means of assessment in terms of technology and platforms and systems that we can use that would support kind of everyone from a kind of assessment basis as well. So that would be my two thoughts.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And Katie?
Would be a radical rethink about the purpose of education and how it can set every child up to succeed, and therefore redefining what success is. My other priority, building on what colleagues have said, is to transform the experience of PE and sport for every child. We are making it impossible for lots of disabled children and children with SEND to have their basic right to access that full range of sport and PE. And instead of being helped to do what they can, which is what we do at Kids, they're told what they can't do. So I think that's the kind of breadth of thinking and transformation, so that we're absolutely ambitious and aspirational, but doing it in the context of the joy and the appetite for learning that every child has, but which will be unique to each child.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Katie. I think I've now covered everyone with the curriculum and assessment review question. Joe, you've made a good point in the chat about our findings from the work that you've led on SEND identification. We've got a few minutes before we wrap up. Do you want to just say a bit more about that, in case people aren't following the chat?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yes, so we looked at what aspects in terms of what early learning goals at age 5 were most associated with children who go on to be identified at a later point as having SEND, either SEND support level or issuing an EHCP. And there was an interesting contrast between those two levels, in that when schools were assessing for SEND support, it was the communication, language and literacy goal that was most associated with the children who were most likely to go on to be identified as having SEND if they'd failed to meet the age expectation at that goal. However, when we looked at children who go on to receive an EHCP, it was very markedly children who had not met the expectation in personal, social and emotional development at age 5. And I think that's interesting in the context of curriculum and assessment review, because age 5 is the last age at which we nationally assess PSED. So if children are struggling then, schools may go on engaging with this, and many of them do, but we have no national sight line on that. We're not, in the sense that what gets measured gets done. We are not reinforcing the importance of that. And also, it's not very prominent in the national curriculum and the way that is set out. So again, it's relying a lot on the individual choices made by school leaders about how they're going to frame the curriculum. But again, like with the arts, that's within a context of it being a very large content heavy curriculum in which there isn't a lot of wriggle room for schools.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for updating everyone on that, Jo. And I put a link in the chat to Jo's fantastic report published earlier this year on identifying SEND, and it really has been some groundbreaking research there. There doesn't seem to be any further questions in either the Q&A or chat. So I hope that we've got through all your questions and all your helpful feedback. Please do keep following our work on this, as well as the work and support services that Capita are offering too. On that note, a huge thank you to Caitlin and colleagues at Capita for supporting today's seminar and for supporting our wider work on inclusion and benchmarking. We talked earlier about the resource implications of being able to cascade best practice and knowledge across the sector. So Caitlin, you and your colleagues have played a really pivotal role in enabling us to do that this morning and through other opportunities too. And thank you again to our panelists, Peter, Katie, Rochelle, Yola, and to Jo as well. Please do keep engaging with us. We're on social media, and our website is epi.org.uk. So any thoughts, any suggestions, do get in touch. But for now, big thank you to everybody, and thank you to all of you for making the time this morning. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Caitlin.